Hello, I'm Garry Stevens, and welcome to the History in the Bible podcast. All the history, in all the books, in all the Bibles. Episode 1.38, Solomon's Magnificence. In the last episode of the History in the Bible, we finished the story of King David. Now we can continue with Solomon, last seen disposing of his father's old guard. Solomon is the very first person in the Bible that scholars can assign a reasonable date to. Or maybe not. Let's just follow the scholarly consensus for the next few episodes. After I finish with Solomon, I'll spend an episode or two on what modern scholars make of the whole period of the United Kingdom. We owe Solomon's dates to the pioneering work of the American scholar Edwin Teale, the father of biblical chronology. Teale was a missionary, an archaeologist, and an academic. He devoted much of his long life to a scientific study of the reigns of the Hebrew kings down to the exile. He published and refined his studies in 3 separate editions of his book, The Mysterious Numbers of the Hebrew Kings, from 1951 to 1983. Despite its title, the work is sober and scholarly. Subsequent researchers have challenged the niceties of his dates, but even so, their own ideas generally only differ by a few years. Only in a few cases do scholars have major quarrels about regnal dates. In this podcast, I will use the slightly modified chronology of J. Maxwell Miller and John Hayes, published in 2007. I have a bibliography and a table of the Hebrew kings on my site, www.historyinthebible.com. I'll get into more details about dating the kings of Judah and Israel in later episodes. The consensus is that Solomon died somewhere between 931 and 927 BC. The slight uncertainty arises from disagreements about how the Hebrews reckoned the beginning of their year. A second date that most scholars think is more or less reliable is the start of the construction of Solomon's temple. Some fancy detective work by historians uses the efforts of the Greek historian Menander, who wrote in the late Hellenistic period. Fragments of his history were preserved by the Jewish Roman historian Josephus, writing in the 1st century AD, 250 years later. Menander translated into Greek the archives of the Phoenician city of Tyre. Menander gave dates for King Hiram I, or Hiram, of Tyre, friend to both David and Solomon. These tie in with other calculations to date the start of the temple's construction to 968 or 967 BC. I know it all sounds rather shaky, relying on one ancient historian reliably quoting a much older one, and some complex calculations. And indeed, some scholars throw the whole edifice out. The age of Solomon, according to the Bible, is the golden age of the United Kingdom. Solomon is the wisest and wealthiest man in the world, a powerful king ruling an empire from the Euphrates to Egypt. This is the pinnacle of the Hebrew kingdom. If Solomon's empire was as described in the Bible, it would have been the largest state in the Middle East. Mind you, all the traditional competitors, Assyria, Babylon, Egypt, were in dire straits and reduced to rump states. In the books of Samuel and Kings, the Deuteronomist dedicates a whopping 38 chapters to David and 9 to Solomon. The chronicler recounts the lusty tale of David in 19 chapters and also gives 9 to Solomon. The chronicler clearly holds Solomon in higher regard than the Deuteronomist. Chronicles whitewashes Solomon the same way it whitewashes David, omitting anything unfavourable. In Chronicles, Solomon is a near mirror image of David. According to Kings, the first thing Solomon does after consolidating his throne with some judicious executions, is to arrange a strategic alliance by marrying a daughter of Pharaoh. As usual, the Pharaoh is unnamed. That done, Solomon receives a message from God at the tent of meeting, housed in the town of Gibeon. Gibeon was the site for two key victories of the house of David: Joab's victory over Saul's son Ishbosheth, and the massacre of the last members of the house of Saul. Quote, 1 Kings 3:5. At Gibeon Yahweh appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, Ask, what shall I grant you? Solomon said, Grant then your servant an understanding mind to judge your people, to distinguish between good and bad. For who can judge this vast people of yours? And God said to him, Because you asked for this, you did not ask for long life, you did not ask for riches, you did not ask for the life of your enemies, but you asked for discernment in dispensing justice. I now do as you have spoken. I grant you a wise and discerning mind. And I also grant you what you did not ask for, both riches and glory all your life. And I will further grant you long life, if you will walk in my ways and observe my laws and commandments. End quote. But hang on a minute. Note the 3 verses that appear just before these. Quote, 1 Kings 3:2. The people, however, continued to offer sacrifices at the open shrines, because up to that time no house had been built for the name of Yahweh. And Solomon, though he loved Yahweh and followed the practices of his father David, also sacrificed and offered at the shrines. End quote. These acts are inappropriate for the builder of God's temple. They will come back to haunt Solomon. Solomon's wisdom is demonstrated when 2 women living together plead for justice. In this famous story, the 2 housemates each claim a baby as their own. What the popular recounting of the story rarely mentions is that the 2 women are prostitutes. Why did the story make them prostitutes? What was the point of that? It's pretty clear that in the ancient Middle East, females were divided into 4 groups: prepubescent girls, married women, widows, and prostitutes. The concept of single adult women just didn't exist. Solomon decides to cleave the child in 2 so they may share it. The fake mother thinks this is just fine, but the real mother pleads for baby's life. Solomon awards the child to the real mother. As the Bible then says, quote, 1 Kings 3:28, When all Israel heard the decision that the king had rendered, they stood in awe of the king, for they saw that he possessed divine wisdom to execute justice. End quote. I don't get it. I just don't get it. How is this possibly the height of wisdom? As depicted in Kings, Solomon's kingdom is a vastly more sophisticated and wealthier state than David's. Even Kings admits that David ruled a parochial little domain. The Bible repeatedly emphasizes that Solomon's kingdom is a dazzling glitterball on the international stage and a major international trader. A whole chapter is devoted to just listing Solomon's high officials. Here is one summary of Solomon's wealth. Quote, 1 Kings 5:1. Solomon's rule extended over all the kingdoms, from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and the boundaries of Egypt. They brought Solomon tribute and were subject to him all his life. Solomon's daily provisions consisted of 30 cors of semolina and 60 cors of flour, 10 fattened oxen, 20 pasture-fed oxen, and 100 sheep and goats, besides deer and gazelles, roebucks, and fatted geese. For he controlled the whole region west of the Euphrates, and he had peace on all his borders round about. All the days of Solomon, Judah and Israel dwelt in safety, everyone under his own vine and under his own fig tree. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariotry, and 12,000 horsemen. End quote. In a foreshadowing of the disaster to come, the Book of Kings describes his mighty holdings in horses, the very animals that Deuteronomy chapter 17 had warned the Hebrew kings against possessing. Now, if you want to go back, I mentioned that in episode 1.23. No other Hebrew king is ever described as possessing such wealth. Both Kings and Chronicles use the visit of the unnamed Queen of Sheba to showcase Solomon's sheer awesomeness. Quote, 1 Kings 10:1. The Queen of Sheba heard of Solomon's fame, and she came to test him with hard questions. She arrived in Jerusalem with a very large retinue, with camels bearing spices, a great quantity of gold, and precious stones. When she came to Solomon, she asked him all that she had in mind. Solomon had answers for all her questions. There was nothing that the king did not know, nothing to which he could not give her an answer. When the Queen of Sheba observed all of Solomon's wisdom and the palace he had built, she was left breathless. End quote. There are 2 traditions about the location of Sheba. One places it in Yemen in the south of Arabia. The other places it in Ethiopia. Both Ethiopian Jews and Christians derive the foundation of their kingdom from Menelik I, the child of Solomon and Sheba. It was said that Ethiopia's ruling dynasty, only expelled in 1974, was descended from Menelik. The Bible says nothing of a romantic liaison, but it's a good story. Tales of Solomon and Sheba flourished through the ages. In the 27th surah of the Quran, the ants, a hoopoe bird informs Solomon of the existence of Sheba's sun-worshipping kingdom. Quote, Surah 27:22. The hoopoe said, I have learned something you did not know. I have come to you from Sheba with reliable information. I found a woman ruling over them, and she was given of everything, and she has a magnificent throne. I found her and her people worshipping the sun instead of God. Satan made their conduct appear good to them, and diverted them from the path, so they are not guided. Solomon said, We will see whether you have spoken the truth, whether you are a liar. Go with this letter of mine, and deliver it to them. Then withdraw from them, and see how they respond. The queen said, O counselors, a gracious letter was delivered to me. It is from Solomon, and it is, In the name of God, the gracious, the merciful. Do not defy me, and come to me submissively. She said, I am sending them a gift, and will see what the envoys bring back. When the messenger came to Solomon, Solomon said, Are you supplying me with money? What God has given me is better than what he has given you. Solomon said, O notables, which one of you will bring me her throne before they come to me in submission? He who had knowledge from the book said, I will bring it to you before your glance returns to you. And when Solomon saw the throne settled before him, he said, This is from the grace of my Lord to test me, whether I am grateful or ungrateful. He who is grateful, his gratitude is to his own credit. He said, Disguise her throne for her, and we shall see whether she will be guided or remains one of the misguided. When she arrived, it was said, Is your throne like this? She said, As if this is it. We were given knowledge before her, and we were submissive. But she was prevented by what she worshipped besides God. She belonged to a disbelieving people. It was said to her, Go inside the palace. And when she saw it, she thought it was a deep pond, and she bared her legs. He said, It is a palace paved with glass. She said, My Lord, I have done wrong to myself, and I have submitted with Solomon to God, Lord of the worlds. The Targumim have similar stories. These were the Aramaic translations and commentaries used by Jews in late antiquity and the early medieval period. A Targum on the Book of Esther adds 3 riddles by which the queen tests Solomon's wisdom. It's not clear whether the Muslim or the Jewish story was written first. Quote, Targum Shani 4. The Queen of Sheba asked, "What is a well of wood? A pail of iron which draws up stones and pours out water." Solomon answered, "A tube of cosmetic." The Queen of Sheba asked, "What is that which comes from the earth as dust, the food of which is dust, which is poured out like water, and which looketh toward the house?" Solomon answered, "Naphtha." The Queen of Sheba asked, "What is that which proceedeth all like a general, which crieth loudly and bitterly, the head of which is like a reed, which is the glory of the rich and the shame of the poor, the glory of the dead and the shame of the living, the joy of the birds and the sorrow of the fishes?" Solomon answered, "Flax." Okay, maybe I've underestimated Solomon's wisdom. I sure couldn't answer those riddles. Kings chapter 10 also shows us Solomon as the king of bling. Quote, 1 Kings 10:18. The king also made a large throne of ivory, and he overlaid it with refined gold. 2 lions stood beside the arms, and 12 lions stood on the 6 steps, 6 on either side. No such throne was ever made for any other kingdom. All King Solomon's drinking cups were of gold, and all the utensils of the Lebanon forest house were of pure gold. Silver did not count for anything in Solomon's days. End quote. Chronicles amps up the bling just one more notch. Quote, 2 Chronicles 9:22. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom. All the kings of the earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Every one of them brought a present, objects of silver and gold, garments, weaponry, spices, horses, and mules, so much year by year. He ruled over all the kings from the Euphrates to the land of the Philistines and to the border of Egypt. The king made silver as common in Jerusalem as stone, and cedar as plentiful as the sycamore or the shephelah. Horses were imported for Solomon from Egypt and from all lands. End quote. The centerpiece of the Bible's narrative of Solomon is the building of the temple, the replacement for the tent of meeting, and the abode of the name of God. This massive construction project is subcontracted to Hiram of Tyre. Hiram, features many times in the stories of both David and Solomon. In 2 Samuel chapter 5, Hiram is introduced in an aside as David's builder. Quote, 2 Samuel 5:11. King Hiram of Tyre sent envoys to David with cedar logs, carpenters and stonemasons, and they built a palace for David. Thus David knew that Yahweh had established him as king over Israel, and had exalted his kingship for the sake of his people Israel. End quote. These verses hint that Hiram is more than just David's hardware supplier. Hiram is the first in the international community to recognize David as the legitimate king of the combined states of Judah and Israel, the authentic king of the Hebrews. Hiram next appears to celebrate Solomon's accession. Ever the schmoozing businessman, Hiram lands another billion-shekel deal. Quote, 1 Kings 5:15. King Hiram sent his officials to Solomon when he heard that he had been anointed king in place of his father. Solomon sent this message to Hiram: "You know that my father David could not build a house for the name of Yahweh his God because of the enemies that encompassed him. But now Yahweh my God has given me respite all around. And so I propose to build a house for the name of Yahweh my God. Please then, give orders for cedars to be cut for me in the Lebanon. My servants will work with yours, and I will pay you any wages you may ask for your servants." When Hiram heard Solomon's message, he was overjoyed. "Praised be Yahweh this day," he said, "for granting David a wise son to govern this great people." So Hiram sent word to Solomon, "I have your message. I will supply all the cedar and cypress logs you require." And Solomon delivered to Hiram 20,000 cors of wheat as provisions for their household, and 20 cors of beaten oil. Such was Solomon's annual payment to Hiram. End quote. Part of Hiram's price is 20,000 cors of wheat each year. A cor was the largest dry measure used in ancient Israel, 230 litres, the size of 2 large bar fridges. Now think of the biggest international shipping container you have ever seen. In the shipping trade, they are called high cubes. Solomon's annual tribute would have occupied more than 50 of those containers. If a single donkey could carry half a cor, that's 40,000 donkey trips a year. Now, to me that sounds like quite a large tribute, although no doubt it was exaggerated for effect. The Septuagint inverts the story told in the Masoretic text and the relation between Hiram and Solomon. In this narrative, the Septuagint text parts company with the Masoretic. I'll use the Septuagint's division for this quote from the book of 3 Kingdoms, which Catholics and Protestants call 1 Kings. Quote, 3 Kingdoms 5:1. And King Hiram of Tyre sent his servants to anoint Solomon in place of his father David. For Hiram had affection for David all the days. And Solomon sent to Hiram, saying, You know my father David, that he could not build a house for the name of Yahweh my God, from the presence of the walls that surrounded him, until Yahweh put them under the traces of his feet. And now Yahweh my God gave me rest all around. There is no plotter, and there is no evil encounter. And behold, I intend to build a house for the name of Yahweh my God. End quote. In the Septuagint, Hiram is not just Solomon's friend, but his patron, anointer, and benefactor. Hiram and Solomon would be associated for 20 years. Hiram would build not only the temple, but Solomon's palace. Through that long relationship, the Book of Kings describes Solomon as Hiram's debtor. Solomon is the spendthrift splashing bucks on massive building projects, and Hiram is the man supplying credit, labour, technology, and supplies. According to the Book of Kings, when Solomon can't pay his debts, Hiram extracts from him 20 cities in Galilee, the Israelite area adjacent to Phoenicia. The book of 2 Chronicles completely overturns that story. In 2 Chronicles, Hiram has no other intention but to serve Solomon's God, and Solomon is running the show. The last thing on Hiram's mind is commercial gain. Oh, good heavens, no. In Chronicles, it is not Solomon who gives 20 cities to Hiram, but Hiram who gives 20 cities to Solomon. In the next episode of the History in the Bible, we continue the story of Solomon and his temple.